Basically, what we got going on here, let's just focus on the update method first, because this is the main thing, is that we have a timer going on to determine when to spawn an enemy. So basically, time since spawn gets added delta time, and if that time since spawn is greater than the time to spawn, then it spawns the enemy, and then it resets the spawn timer. So basically, every few seconds, it's going to create that enemy, as you saw before. Now, the method that exists in mono behaviors that we need to use, and this is one to remember for sure, is called Instantiate. So this will create a game object. As you can see, you can define the type in the basically the brackets right there, but it's a game object. Now, it could be a game object of a specific type, but it's by default a game object. And it's going to be a game object of the type of whatever game object you spawn here. And I really shouldn't say, well, I guess it is technically a type, but really it's a prefab that you're looking for. So you're creating a game object out of a prefab that you drag into the inspector on the right, or you could just create a brand new game object if you really wanted. As long as it's a type of game object, it doesn't really matter. You can spawn anything you want here. Now, there's several different overrides for this function, but this particular version will spawn an enemy or any game object at a very specific point, and that point is going to be set to this position, the second parameter, which I'm using the spawn point's transform position itself as the spawn point. I mean, couldn't get more straightforward than that. So whatever position that game object, the spawn point game object, exists in, is where it's going to create these enemy type game objects. Quaternion identity, we really don't need to worry about that too much, but that's the rotation for the game object. So basically, whatever rotation the enemy had as we created it in the editor is the rotation it's going to have when we spawn it. And then it's spawning using the spawn point transform as its parent game object. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that to tie that game object with the parent. You would just choose a different overload that doesn't specify the transform, but maybe just specifies vector3 position, and that would work out just fine as well. But in this particular version, it's spawning it at this position, the spawn point transform position, with whatever quaternion rotation it had before, and it's adding it under the spawn point as a child game object. You could, by the way, change that to any game object. So maybe you have a combat manager or something like that, and you want it to be a child of that. That would be fine. So the only other things here really to note is that we are setting the game object in the inspector, so public game object enemy type. We can define the time to spawn and change that in the inspector as well. Time since spawn, that's a private variable because it only needs to be kept track of in the script. And then private transform spawn point. Because the script is directly attached to a game object that will have a transform will have a transform as a position, we don't need to worry about that, and we can just get that with get component transform rather than assigning it directly in the script. So it's just a little bit of a time saver for anybody who's editing the game object, but not necessarily the script.